We're ready to go to work here today. Larry Bull's back. We're doing Pond Management Part 2 today. And I thought it was a great show last Monday, Larry, so we're looking forward to doing some more today. Glad you're here.
Well, thank you, JT.
All right, Adam Butler's here with us as well. As always, we got some things we're going to be talking about with him, and as well as Major Chris Reed is here with us, and obviously a very solemn week, but a very special week for our fallen officers this week. And, of course, yours will be coming up on Wednesday for the fallen officers with the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. Heavy hearts in all of law enforcement today, obviously with Officer McKeithen, whose funeral is about to get underway in Biloxi today.
Yeah, it just kind of falls in a week where we're remembering officers who have given the ultimate sacrifice and died in the line of duty, and that's a tragic deal there. We're still thinking and praying for those family members and the staff and the officers down there in Biloxi. And our memorial is Wednesday, as you may mention of, and we will probably light a candle in honor of that officer. I know we've done that in the past if there's been instances in close proximity to the timing of National Police Week, which is that's what this week is. It's coinciding with National Police Week across the country. Memorial services take place throughout the state and nation, again honoring the sacrifice of those who've died in the line of duty. The keynote speaker for us this year would be Michael Hurst, who is the United States Attorney here in the Southern District, and I look forward to hearing from him, and it's always a good time to remember those and see the family members, and again, just it's a tough week for those in Biloxi, and it's also a tough week for those in law enforcement.
It is a tough week for those in law enforcement. There's no doubt about that. And y'all's will be 10 o'clock at the headquarters, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. Okay. It is.
And every part of law enforcement has this going on this week, and as we said, a very tough day for everybody that gets it started. Getting it started today with Officer McKeithen's funeral. All right, let's get to it. We got some upcoming pond management workshops.
Yeah. So JT, the last week and this week and probably next week we're going to be talking about pond management on the air. So hopefully the listeners will get a lot of what they need to know. But if you want more, our fishery staff is actually going to be hosting some pond management workshops around the state, right, Larry?
Yes, that's correct, Adam. We've got one on June the 4th in Humphreys County in Belzona at the Humphreys County Extension Office. That's at 6 p.m. We have one on June the 18th in Fulton in Itawamba County at the Itawamba County Extension Office. That's also at 6 o'clock. And then on the 20th of June in Atala County in Kosciuszko, at the Atala County Extension Office, we have another workshop, and again, that's at 6 p.m.
Y'all have been doing a bunch of those over the last couple of years, haven't you?
Yes, we started that about 3 or 4 years ago. It's been very popular.
It's a pretty good turnout.
Yes.
Yeah.
It varies, but we do up to 50 people at some of the workshops.
I know you randomly get people ask, when are y'all having some of that stuff? I have a pond, I have this, I have that. What can I do to learn? And that's what this is for. You can show up and learn all you want about getting a pond at your house or...
Yes, we go through about an hour presentation with a lot of the topics that we cover on this radio show last week and today, and also have time for questions and answers. If pond owners have any plant problems in their pond, they can bring samples of their plant. The biologist can identify those plants and help them figure out a way to treat those plants too. So come out and you'll learn some information about pond management.
And we have those coming up. Also, fishing rodeos coming up. Fishing rodeos and free fishing days. Tell us about that.
Okay. Well, the fishing rodeo is coming up on the 18th this Saturday. One in Hazelhurst at Lake Hazel. That begins at 8 o'clock. And then we also have one in Carthage at McMillan Park, and that also starts at 8 o'clock. And the last one that we have starts at 7 o'clock. That's at our North Mississippi Fish Hatchery near Enid, just off Interstate 55 below Enid Dam. So 3 rodeos this weekend to get out. Free fishing days occur on the first weekend of June. It's part of National Fishing and Boating Week. Specifically here in Mississippi, it'll be June 1st and 2nd, where people can fish without a license. And also those folks that fish on state fishing lakes or state park lakes are not required to have a permit. So totally free fishing. Get out and have a great time.
And you can do that. And there's some opportunities. Well, we talk about this, and Adam, you may want to take this, but we have such great state lakes. We have so many opportunities. People don't realize this. They don't realize what we have here in the state and how important it is for us.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where you get familiar with something and just tend to overlook it. I mean, that's any facet of life that can happen. But you're right. I think almost how many total, Larry? I mean, almost every community in the state's going to have a lake within probably half hour at the most.
Minimum. Yeah. Right.
They're great opportunities to get out. And in Mississippi, we're just blessed with a lot of great opportunities to get on the water in a whole bunch of different ways. The lakes we have, the flood control reservoirs we have in the north part of the state, some of the public waterways we have. I've done a lot of canoeing on some of the sandy creeks down in the southern part of the state. So we just catch fish while you're doing it. So
you'd be whitewater rafting down there right now.
a little
there
bit.
Was a bad rain event. I think we were involved in 5 to 7 rescues over the weekend. Just it rained like animals were coming by folks 2 by 2. It was raining so much. 12 inches one day. So, the opportunity's there, but, be mindful this weekend if you're going out to make sure that those areas that you're going to is not affected by flood water, not affected by river water up and down those tributaries. Be mindful of that because there's a lot of people that are suffering some damage to personal property and belongings. And then also when you're dealing with flood water, the area is not as it may be in your memory bank when it was a normal pool, or the waters do different stuff when they're flowing fast. But shouldn't be an issue coming up this weekend. We're supposed to have good weather. Just be mindful of that.
We're talking here today on Mississippi Outdoors Radio, brought to you by the Foundation for Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, Pond Management. And we're going to talk with Larry Bull again today as we talked about how to build them, what to do, what to stock them. But now here we go. We've got them going, and I think that's kind of where we're going to go from here. So we've got about a minute before we hit the break. I want to talk about management activity and what's the most important management activity a pond owner can do, and we'll start with that question. We'll maybe get started on the answer. We'll have to finish up after the break. But what is that, Larry?
Well, it's to get out and fish your pond. As you said, JT, we kind of covered stocking last week. We tell folks to kind of wait a couple years and let the fish populations establish themselves before they start taking fish out. But once that's the case, people need to get out and they need to fish their ponds, and they need to harvest fish out of it to really keep the pond going and meet the objectives that they have set for the pond. Mm-hmm. You'd be surprised at how many times we get a call from a pond owner who wants some help from us, and one of the first questions we ask is, well, what kind of fish are you catching, and what sizes of fish are you catching? And they'll say, well, we hadn't fished the pond much. And so it's really important. If you're going to invest all this time and money into building a pond and stocking it right, you need to get out and fish it too, because this is how you're going to manage your fish populations from now throughout having the pond.
Mm-hmm. I like that answer, JT. What can you do to make your pond better? Just go fishing.
Go fishing.
That's correct, JT. Mm-hmm. And don't just fish. And we're going to primarily talk about bass and brim ponds, bluegill and bass. So it's important to both, fish the pond, fish for both your bluegill and your bass, and use various sizes of lures so that you can catch a wide variety of sizes. And that'll become evident as to why that's important as we go through this.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about that, so I guess the question is how many do you harvest from a pond? I guess it all depends on, right?
It really does. It depends on what you're managing your pond for. So, for example, if you want to have what we call a balanced population, where you produce a decent sized bluegill, and when I say a decent size, an 8 to 9 inch bluegill and a nice sized bass, 5 to 7 pound bass, not necessarily trophy fishing, but a nice range of sizes of fish. You want to, you want to harvest both bass and bluegill, and we typically tell people to harvest 10 to 15 pounds of bass per acre per year, and this number is for an unfertilized pond. It's important to realize that you control the way the fish population's in your pond by how much bass you harvest, how many bass you harvest, because those are the predators, and they eat the bluegill, and they control the sizes of the bluegill as well. So, like I say, if you're managing for what we call a balanced population, you want to harvest most of your bass that are under 14 inches, and then you can take up to 30 to 45 pounds of bluegill out of the pond per acre per year. But if you're managing for big brim, if you want to have trophy bluegill, and those are the kind that people refer to as dinner-sized bluegill, you don't harvest a lot of bass, and you harvest primarily bass that are over 13 or 14 inches, and you have a concentration of small bass in your pond, and they eat most of the bluegill, and then the few bluegill that survive, they can get into really large sizes. And then on the other flip side, if you want to manage for big bass, you don't want to harvest. You harvest most of your small fish, and then you may implement what we call a slot limit, where you protect a certain size of bass, 14 to 18 inches, for example, and then you harvest a lot of the bass that are less than that slot limit. So this way you reduce the competition of bass and the number of bass, and you then can produce some trophy fish. And I'm referring to a trophy as a 10-pound fish or bigger. So it all depends on, how you manage your bass population is really what ends up in your pond, if you will.
I guess you need to keep a harvest record, huh?
You do, and I can't stress that enough, how important it is to keep records of not only how many pounds of fish you take out each year, but also the sizes of fish. I suggest that you keep your records on an annual basis, and you measure all the fish that you catch, bass and bluegill, and also keep records of how many pounds of fish you actually harvest. This gets back to why I said earlier that it's important to fish with various size lures and fish for the different species in your pond, so that you can really put together a really good picture of what's going on in your pond.
Why is that important to keep the records of these fish?
Well, this is how you're managing your pond, and this helps you as you monitor, as you look at it from year to year. You can monitor changes in the pond in terms of the fish populations. You may see that you've harvested a bunch of small bass, and you can actually see larger fish showing up in the population. It also allows you have those records in case you need to adjust how many bass or brim that you're harvesting out of your pond. Mm-hmm. It also helps the biologist. If you ever call one of our biologists and you need help with your pond, having these fishing records is really important. It helps us diagnose what may be going on with your pond, and it just helps us help you manage your pond better.
I guess that's a lot like running trail cameras if you're managing for deer or something on a piece of land. I mean, you can get a lot of that same information. You can, the ratio of fawns to adults, so you can get an idea of recruitment. You can get its sex ratio, all sorts of management information by doing the same thing. So pretty similar to managing on the dry ground, I guess.
I'm sure it is, yes. Yes, it is.
Always the question about fertilizing your pond. That is important, isn't it, Larry?
Well, it can be. It depends really on how much fishing you do and the size of your pond. And the reason I say that is because when you fertilize a pond, you're increasing the number of fish in your pond, which in turn means you've got to harvest more fish. So to meet those objectives, that we talked about and how many fish you have to harvest, you've got to really increase the number of fish you harvest, probably up to about 3 times. So when I mentioned earlier that you harvest 10 to 15 pounds of bass per acre per year, you're going to be talking about 30 to 35 pounds of bass per acre per year in a fertilized pond. And also so you want to fertilize if you're really going to commit yourself to that, and if you feel like you're going to fish the pond a lot and harvest a lot of fish out of it.
What do you fertilize with usually?
Well, there's several different kinds of fertilizer on the market for ponds. Typically, the fertilizers have a high phosphorus content. If you're familiar with fertilizer, it typically has 3 numbers. You might have a 10, 50, 2, 4. The 10 represents the percent of nitrogen. The 52 represents the percent of phosphorus, and then the last number is the potassium. And so you want a fertilizer with high phosphorus content. And like I say, there's several different kinds. It comes in liquid, it comes in a water-soluble powder, and also a granular type fertilizer is available.
What's the best way, Keith and JS says, what's the best way to treat floating algae?
Floating algae. Well, if it's floating, it may be actually filamentous algae that's dead if it looks like it's floating cotton balls. So that typically is a sign that it's dying. So you may not need to treat it. Over time, it'll just decompose and be out of your pond.
Gene said, I missed last week. Who can I talk to see if my property is capable of holding a pond?
The NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service. It's a arm of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. But those folks, they have some people on their staff that can help you with pond design and evaluating your property.
And you can do that. Will that not cause, someone I guess was asking a follow-up question, wouldn't that cause aquatic vegetation to get out of control? I guess he's going back to what we were talking about with the algae there. I'm not sure. Just another question that's passing along.
Or maybe the fertilization.
Mm-hmm.
If you're fertilizing, if you've got a problem weed, fertilizing it, they're going to make it worse.
You typically don't want to fertilize if you have a lot of plants in your pond. That's correct. Because obviously you're just feeding your plants, and the goal of fertilization is to promote the growth of single cell algae, which makes your pond water turn green.
We're talking about pond management, the how-tos, and this is part 2 of that. Lime is important. Tell me what lime does for a pond when it comes to fertilization.
Okay, lime is you use lime when your soils the pH of your soils are too acidic. So the lime brings the soil pH to a more basic level, and then it allows the fertilizer to work, because these fertilizers are high in phosphorus. If the soil is too acidic, that phosphorus gets bound up in the soil and it's not available to the algae that you're trying to promote the growth of.
It's something to learn. You learn something every day, don't you?
And people use lime. It's not uncommon to put lime on your pastures or your garden plot. And I know our wildlife biologists recommend that for food plots and in the areas of the state that
it's all about
it.
the pH, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. When it comes to a pond, how do you know when it's time to fertilize?
Well, JT, you typically start fertilizing when the water temperature stabilizes above 60 degrees in the spring. That usually is in mid-March, late March in the south part of the state, and probably a little bit later in the northern part of the state, early April. So water temperature kind of dictates when you start fertilizing. And assuming that you put fertilizer in and you get a good bloom, algae bloom is what we call it. And that's, again, we're fertilizing. We're trying to promote the growth of single-cell algae, which is and then your water is going to turn green. So how do you know when to fertilize again? Well, we tell folks there's no set schedule that you fertilize on. You have to measure the visibility in the water. And what I mean by that, you have to measure the clarity. And we tell folks to take a white dish or plate, something white in color and drop it down into the water. And if you can see that object after you've dropped the water drop the object more than 24 inches into the water, then the water's too clear and it's time to fertilize. So what we tell folks is we want them to maintain that water clarity of 18 to 24 inches. So that's when you know it's time to fertilize again. Depends on how clear the water is.
Mm-hmm. And we talked about lime and fertilizer. There's different kinds. What type of lime do you put out there? And do you ever do lime and fertilizer at the same time?
You do not put them out together. We recommend that you use agricultural lime, which is available through your co-op. Usually you're buying most of the recommendations. If you know that you need lime and you've determined this through a soil test that you can do through Mississippi State University, you're talking about 1 or 2 tons per acre. So we're talking about pretty bulky stuff. You put your lime out in the wintertime, late fall, winter. It's important to spread that lime on the bottom of the pond. We recommend that you cover at least 80% of the pond bottom. So you can't some people want to just put it around the banks of their pond and hope that over time the wave action will wash it out. Well, that's not going to work. You're going to have to actually put it on some kind of a boat system or raft or whatever you can come up with. One way to do it is put plywood over a john boat and spray it off or scoop it off. But you've got to cover most of like I say, 80% of the pond bottom.
When it comes to fertilizer, obviously, what type of fertilizer should you use to fertilize a pond?
Okay, well, we talked a little bit about this. There's the granular fertilizer.
Right.
It's an 046O. It's got that high phosphorus content. Water soluble powder typically is maybe a 1052-4 formulation. Again, it's got a high phosphorus content.
Do it out the back of the boat with the motor going. Try to disperse it.
The water-soluble powder, you can just broadcast it. Mm-hmm. The granular fertilizer, we recommend that you have some kind of platform. You don't just want to dump it out onto the pond bottom, but make yourself some platforms, maybe in about 2 to 3 feet along the shallow areas of the pond, about 2 to 3 feet deep, and maybe you can take some concrete blocks and put a piece of plastic over it and then dump the fertilizer on that. If you have a fishing pier, you could build a wooden platform and attach it to your fishing pier. Typically, you need about 1 platform for every 4 or 5 acres of pond that you have. And then you dump your granular fertilizer on that.
Is there a time when you don't fertilize a pond? Is there a certain time where you shouldn't do it?
Well, there's several instances where we don't recommend that you fertilize your pond. Typically, if you don't fish it a lot, you don't need to fertilize it and then produce more fish. If the water is too muddy, you don't want to fertilize it because, again, you're promoting the growth of that algae. Muddy water will limit sunlight and not allow the algae to grow. If your pond has a lot of weeds in it, other aquatic plants, don't fertilize it because you're just going to fertilize those plants and not really produce the bloom that you want to. And typically those are the situations where you don't want to. Or if you have a lot of undesirable fish species, for example, I don't know if you had a pond with a lot of gar or whatever it might be, bullhead catfish or whatever, you don't want to fertilize that pond and produce more undesirable fish species.
Sonny and Wiggins got a question. Go ahead, Sonny.
In light of all the rain that we've got, particularly this last few days, all the fresh water going into ponds, is there anything we need to be concerned about having too much of that fresh water, or anything other than what you've mentioned we need to try to do?
No, I don't think so. I'd be just keep an eye on my dam and make sure my dam is holding up. But other than that, the fish will be fine.
I've heard of ponds turning because of too much fresh water is why I'm asking, and actually killing the fish.
Typically, that will only happen if you have a deeper pond, maybe deeper than 15 feet, And typically that won't happen this time of year. It's more of a phenomenon that happens in August or September after we've had a hot summer, and the pond will, what we call stratify, and that lower layer will be low in oxygen. This time of year, I wouldn't expect that to happen.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonny. Someone says, I have a 2-acre pond loaded with small bass less than a pound, ready to catch fish over a pound. What should we do?
Well, if you want to, I'm assuming you want to increase the sizes of the bass that you catch, I would suggest that you harvest more bass. This is a typical common problem that we see. I'm going to assume that you're not fertilizing this pond, so I would harvest 20 to 25 pounds of bass per acre this year. Start keeping those records, those lengths of fish, and if you don't see the sizes of your bass improve over the next couple years, continue to harvest small bass until you see some bigger fish show up. And again, this is why those records are so important.
I think that's the thing we've taken from this more than anything else is you need records. If you're gonna have a pond, you want it to be what you want it to be, you need records. You know, we need to come up with some kind of service like we have for the pools. You know, you just go get your water out, run it up there to the pool store, and they sell you all the crud you got to put in there and stir it up, make your pool really nice. You know, we could all have we'd all be sitting on a big hill there if we could figure out how to do that with pond water. Huh?
It would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we'd all.
You get it going, we'll think about
Well, I
putting
mean,
Larry in
thank
employment
God.
with
I mean,
you.
it's foolproof for swimming pools now, man. You just get you some water, you take it up there, they analyze it. Here you go.
I had a pool at a house, and
If you could tell everything about your pond from a water sample, you'd be doing great.
Wouldn't that be something? That would make it nice. As far as that's concerned, if people want to learn more, I know you have people. You may have to get on a waiting list, but you obviously have people that come out and talk with you and help you and assist you with your pond management, right?
Yes, we sure do. We have biologists around the state. We have a pond check application form that's available through our Jackson office. So if you need some help with your pond, we ask that you fill out this form and send it back to the biologist, and they'll contact you and help you in whatever way they feel like is necessary.
Well, I think we learned a lot here today, man. Thank you for coming back and doing pond management number 2 with us today.
All right. Thank you, JT.
I really appreciate you doing that. It's going to be a beautiful week to go fishing, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
My goodness gracious.
I tell you what I've learned, JT.
What's that?
Need to fish more.
That's right.
That sounds like the answer to all the problems. Just fish more.
Major Reed,
hello.
we're thinking about you and all police officers out there and all the folks that work for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks on this special week of law enforcement. And I want to tell you how much I appreciate what you do to protect the not only the resource, but you're also out there protecting folks too. A lot of people don't realize it. Game warden arrests you for doing something if you're doing something wrong
That's
too.
it, man.
You're a sworn officer of the law.
We got bracelets in our pockets too. We'll put on you if you want.
We thank you for what y'all do and all the men that work with
I
y'all.
told Butler today it's National Police Week, so buy a cop a donut if you see one.
That's right.
And it will not probably be turned down.
I know you, Chris.
Thank you,
Donuts
brother.
are not in your diet.
Thank you for what y'all do. Every law enforcement officer out there, I mean that.